Strategies 1 through 10 are actually reviews of the major concepts that we find in a framework for understanding poverty. So if you're familiar with that work, these strategies will sound familiar to you. We start in research-based strategies, and at this point I will refer to this book as RBS because that is much faster, RBS standing for research-based strategies. The very first strategy is analyzing student resources. And again, if we're familiar with framework, we know that one of the actions in framework is to analyze student resources. It is repeated here, but it is repeated in a little more detail. On page 21, we see a list of questions that we can ask ourselves about a student to determine whether or not that student does indeed have the resource. So, looking at strategy 1, you will notice as you go through the book that there is an effect size listed for every strategy. During our session today, we will not have time to analyze every effect size for every strategy, but we will look at some of them. For example, strategy number 1 the research tells us that a response to intervention, or RTI, has a huge effect size of 1.07. And Dr. Payne points out that an intervention, an innovation, is only effective if the students have the resources that are necessary in order to carry out the intervention. So we did include that particular effect size. And then socioeconomic status itself has an effect size of 0.54, which is considerably above the 0.40 average. Each strategy has an explanation. Again, we will go over during this recording some of the key points in the explanation. For strategy number 1, this is a repeat of what I have mentioned several times. Interventions work only if they are based on resources to which the student has access, or if the research base is provided. If I select an intervention for a student and I know that resource is not there, but I can provide it, I can still help that student to be successful using that intervention. Here we see the list of resources. Again, this looks familiar from Dr. Payne's work on a framework for understanding poverty. I won't take time to go over an explanation of each of these resources, but they are explained briefly in the RBS book. The sample activity, as we mentioned earlier, there are questions to determine interventions. When we have a student who is struggling academically or behaviorally, the key question is, what resources are available to the student? How can I build on the resources that the student has access to? Which ones can I develop? Okay? And here are questions that I can ask. When we as educators express concern over a student, and when we talk to our colleagues about how to best help that student, one of our first questions might be, what resources are available to the student? And these questions can help us to determine those resources.